Hello and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. We are exclusive to the PA UK radio network. I'm your host, Paul Rook, and we are joined tonight by my regular co-hosts, and both stupendous they are, Kerry Greenaway and Richard Clements. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad at all. Really busy, but not too bad. How's your week's been?
Not too bad. It's been all right, actually. Yeah, getting my head down, getting quite a lot of work done, so that's quite good. And paranormal work actually, as well as crystal work. So yeah, I'm loving life at the moment.
Brilliant. So when you get your book out?
Tomorrow.
Okay, tomorrow. Cool.
Yeah, tomorrow.
But I don't know. Actually, I thought.
And Richard, when are you bringing your book out?
Oh well, this afternoon at some point.
Oh, okay. Big Terry. That's fine.
Talking of
Incidentally,
books,
we do have our book out. Just thought I'd get our plug in there for the Paranormal Concept Extra, available on Amazon and in Kindle.
yes.
Yeah.
You know what? I think people. We are so, we do the shows. They're absolutely brilliant. We write the blogs, and that's brilliant. But we cover so many different areas and so many perspectives from the paranormal, and that actually comes through in the blogs more than it does actually on the shows. On the shows, we focus on like a specific topic or area of interest. But, the blogs explore that concept and raise questions in your mind so much more than what you sometimes get off of a show. So go buy the book, guys, because seriously, it's damn good.
Well, yeah,
it's got something for everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
If you're new into the paranormal, it comes up with lots of concepts and ideas that maybe you can run with and make experiments up with. And even for the more seasoned paranormal investigator, it can, open up more avenues and maybe even thought processes you've not even thought of yet.
And there's ghost stories in there, and ufology, and spiritual, and crypto, and all sorts of wonderful things covered in that book. And it's not available on the internet now. All of that writing that's been done is not out there on the internet now. So if you want to have a read, you're going to have to go and get the book.
Absolutely. And it's a big old book as well, isn't it?
It is quite a hefty one.
Yeah.
It's quite hefty. And it's all original. It's all original work, all from our little brains, everybody.
Speak for yourself.
That's a good exercise in itself.
Obviously, we've researched it from other people, but, we actually formatted it ourselves, we wrote it ourselves.
Absolutely. All 100% original.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and some original content in there that wasn't actually released onto the internet as well. So it's definitely one that's worth having on your bookshelf, everybody. Paranormal Concept Extra, available on Amazon. So anyway, should we get on with the show?
And it's worldwide. Any country can buy it. Just go to the normal Amazon and type it in.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So should we get on with the show?
Yeah, what are we talking about tonight then?
Well, following last week's show, we spoke to Barry and Connie.
Can we actually follow last week's show?
I don't know if we can. One thing I would like to reiterate, though, I said it at the end of last week's show, and I'm going to say it again. No matter what your opinion is, everybody has that personal experience. That was Barry and Connie's personal experience. That's what they experienced. That's what they believe is happening. And it's important to listen without judgment and with an open mind.
Indeed.
Yes, I totally agree with you there.
Because we all have personal experiences in the paranormal. I've got them, Paul's got them, Richard's got them. And if you when you tell those stories, you think in your head yourself, you're thinking, God, this sounds crazy. But it happened. How that happened or what was going on and all the other things are questions. They're still questions, even within the person who experienced it. And Barry even admitted that himself. He says he doesn't ultimately understand this, but this is what he's experiencing, and he's putting it out there. And it's very easy to ridicule people for their experience and for what they're putting out there. So it's important to, be critical minded. I'm not saying it's, you have to think critically in this field as much as you do with blind faith, but it's important to listen to someone's story. It's important to do it without judgment And we have to do that on every level throughout the paranormal, no matter what case you're discussing. If you spoke to somebody who had a Loch Ness sighting, for example, that's their experience. They believe they saw what they saw. Whether or not it then gets explained at a later date becomes a point in measure, doesn't it? You know what I mean? But it is learning to listen without judgment, which is actually when we spoke to Krista Murray before on the ufology side of things. You know, that was a lesson we learned from that, you know, scenario is, you know, you can listen to the experience, like witness statements with the police. They listen and then follow up leads and see where that rabbit hole takes them. And that's exactly what you should be doing with with anybody that you come across in regards to the paranormal. I would like to say, we spoke to King Henry VIII, and I asked if there was anything on the Mary Rose that was of specific interest or value to King Henry himself, and he said that there was a chalice he referenced. Yeah?
Yes, that's right.
Now, I have actually messaged the Mary Rose Trust to see if there is a chalice that has been found of that description on the wreck. As yet, and imagine it's locked down in the UK, so there's probably nobody working on it at the moment, and no one's answering emails, so I've yet to hear back. But I will let you know if I do hear back from the Mary Rose, just to see, because it's things like that may indicate. We looked on the internet. I would say this, me, Richard and Paul, after the show, we did go and have a really good look out there on the internet, and we couldn't find a chalice that had been recovered that's out there on the internet anyway. Good we, guys?
Yeah, there was a lot of artifacts actually retrieved, and they're still cataloguing them to this day, so, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it's still worth following up. I mean, don't always go to the internet. There's the lesson of the story there for researchers and investigators. Don't rely solely on the internet. There are other avenues you can follow.
But to quell the skeptics out there who go, we could have found that on the internet. We couldn't find that chalice linked, to the Mary Rose on the internet. So we've actually gone to the Mary Rose Trust to see if there is a chalice like that. If there is, and we couldn't find it, it's not out there, then that kind of is a tiny bit of validation.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, yeah, it will make a very good point of interest.
It would make a point of interest. But anyway, this week's show, we thought we'd take a closer look at the three monarchs that we spoke to on last week's show because, wow, I mean, from a historical perspective, it's incredibly fascinating in its own right. But there are some weird stories and tales and myths and legends that surround these monarchs in their own right.
Yes, I mean, sort of like we all know sort of like a lot about them, sort of like their lives in general, because a lot's written, but quite a few people, you know, sort of like we're usually quite generally unaware of what happened to them post-mortem, so to speak.
So we thought we'd take a little look into macabre history tonight rather than, the life and times.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, although sometimes the life and times is relevant to what happened to them post-death.
Well, yes.
A little bit like Richard III, but we'll get to him in a bit. Now, because the first one I wanted to talk about was King Henry VIII. my King Henry VIII. So,
oh, yeah. You were quite smitten with him, weren't you?
Oh, I do like a bit of King Henry. Yeah, pure narcissist, my kind of guy. So anyway... Oh dear.
Don't tempt fate.
Oh, I know. I am tempting fate a lot. So anyway, I remembered, I've had a vague recollection of a story regarding King Henry when they were transporting his body from like when he died to the burial bit, which was about dogs like licking up his blood. And so I thought, oh, this led us down a rabbit hole, everybody. So this is where we're going with this one. So first of all, we looked at this particular tale. Now, this was supposed to happen weeks after he had died, before he was lowered into the crypt, right? Because we know he's buried at St. George's Chapel in Windsor. Mm-hmm. But he was actually transported there in a lead coffin. Now, this was another thing we found out about transporting kings or queens' bodies if they didn't die sort of like at home, right? the procession itself is just astonishing, weren't it, guys? That when we looked at that particular aspect.
Well, because it would all be part of the monarch's reign. You know, it starts off with the coronation, and that's a big procession. And when they pass, they also have, you know, it ends in a big procession. So, you know, it's sort of like the classic sort of funeral rite, isn't it?
Yeah, thousands turn out for these funeral
They'll
processions.
all turn out for it.
I mean, nowadays, bear in mind, if you think about, I don't know, the Queen Mother's funeral or Princess Diana's funeral, they went from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey, right?
Yeah.
And that procession and how pomp and ceremony that was, that happened. No matter where the king or queen died, that would happen throughout the country. Yeah. And where the coffin laid was a phenomenal piece of work, actually. It would be like there'll be an effigy of the king or queen on top of the coffin itself. There'd be, you know, one of them was 6 stories high with cherubs and God knows what else. This work of art.
Yes, it certainly is a good work of art, and it doesn't actually exist now, does it? But they used to make them from wax, I believe.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, it was all waxwork.
I think, you know, because obviously when the monarch sort of died, you had a set period of time to prepare for the funeral because you wouldn't want to leave it too long. So I suppose working in wax would be a good way to sort of produce something pretty quickly.
And reusable.
And really, yeah, you can melt it back down to make candles again.
Now, King Henry's one was a large funeral effigy on top of the coffin. So they've made this effigy of him on top of the coffin, complete with a crown at one end and crimson velvet shoes, at the other. And one chronicler at the time said it was so realistic he seemed just as if he was alive.
Must have been an eerie sight.
All I can say is I think you have to put that in context. Nowadays, we'd probably look at it and go, what the hell? But back then, you know, it's very, you know, what's the word? Rustic?
Arts and crafts, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe arts and crafts. So for them back then, it would have been very realistic. For us now, looking at it modernised, we'd go, really? But, you know. Proof is in the pudding.
Plus, these chroniclers, they, even after the king's demise, you would still want to flatter them, even when they were dead. So you would say the effigy they made was a good likeness.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the spectator, though? It's like, I thought you rode horses, not coffins.
But I would like to say this. When we was talking to Barry and he was saying that he was talking to these people, within myself, I'm thinking, what if? What if you are actually talking to these kings? And in that, you're thinking, you treat them with the respect that they're due as a king. Or, you know what I mean? And even that, in my head, I was thinking, oh, I'm not quite sure about this, but we'll go with it. But what if? What if we was? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I can see your point. Even I was sort of watching my P's and Q's when I was sort of like asking Charles I some questions. You know, sort of. You know, you have to. You know, I know it sounds funny, and people are probably listening to this thinking how ridiculous, but you know, it certainly brings something out in you as well.
It does. That's an interesting concept.
We tend to do that on an investigation anyway, because. You know, you get the investigators that go out there and they're respectful. They don't actually know whether ghosts exist.
True.
But you still treat whatever you're trying to talk to with respect. So whether it's a ghost of a person or is it something more energy-wise, I mean, I don't know. But you tend to treat it with respect, and that's all you did.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like it's an etiquette we follow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, back to King Henry VIII.
Yeah.
Back to King. It was just like a little point I wanted to make. Right. So at the halfway mark, the coffin's housed at Sion Abbey. Right. Now, this is quite a prestigious religious house. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he's very heavy, is King Henry VIII. At this stage, he weighed 300 pounds at his death. That's a big boy. He's a large. He's very large. And he wasn't well. Got to remember this as well. He had a lot of physical problems. at this stage. So by now he's leaking a little bit. And the story goes that either blood or putrid matter leaked from the coffin. Now the coffin had actually split. The lead coffin had actually split, which is why he was able to leak, right? So that men went in to repair this lead coffin in the night, but when they arrived, they saw a stray dog under the coffin licking at this fluid. All I'm saying. But this is a tale because way back in 1532, King Henry and Anne Boleyn attended an Easter Sunday sermon by the Friar William Petto. Now, he was a very big provincial of the observant Franciscans, right? So he was a very big supporter of his first wife, Catherine of Aragon.
Yeah.
And in this sermon, he compared King Henry VIII to King Ahab, who was husband of Jezebel, right? Famous religious character. When Ahab died, wild dogs licked his blood, and Petto actually said that the same thing would happen to the English king. So this tale, this myth of this stray dog licking King Henry's blood, harkens back to this sermon that he had attended.
Yes, it seems they're trying to sort of like overlay a prophetic sort of happening, aren't they? Sort of. Yeah, an interesting one.
It is interesting. Now, the main source for this coffin leaking story is actually Gilbert Burnet. Now, he's a Scottish theologian and a bishop of Salisbury, generally considered reliable, except when he's not. That's kind of how it's put. It's like he's sort of he's like there are gaps and embellishments in his accounts, but generally he's okay, right?
Yeah, I get. I mean, a lot of chroniclers from sort of like this period and before and since, you know, there are good ones and bad ones, but I've actually heard of this guy before, and as you say, Kerry, he is considered quite a good chronicler, quite accurate. But as you say, except when he's not, which I think is a good little sort of post note.
But one historian who's actually looked at this work quite closely praises Burnet's book as an epoch in our historical literature, but fretted that a great deal of fault had been found, no doubt justly, with the inaccuracies and general imperfection of the transcripts on which his work was largely founded, and which gave rise to endless blunders. So then it's not accurate, is it? So you can't take it as read. It's like one of those.
I don't know, perhaps it's more to do with the people that are reading it. They're just picking the bits they want to believe, and there's a sort of like knocking the bits they don't. I don't know.
I don't know. Having not read Mr. Burnet's book, I can't comment myself, to be fair.
I think a lot of people used to do that. I mean, just look at what they did with the Bible.
Yeah.
Different religions, they'll take what they want and ditch the rest.
Oh, that was a theological nightmare I went down yesterday. Don't start me on that one. Now, one of Burnet's most well-known tales linked to this particular Tudor law was that King Henry VIII described fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, as a Flanders mare. We have repeated that ourselves.
Yes, I must admit I'm guilty of that.
Right, but Antonia Fraser, who's an author, sternly writes, in defence of her female contemporary, I would imagine, that no contemporary reference to back it up. So there's no other reference to that apart from Burnet's work.
But, you know, it's a good story, if anything else. You know, I think that is why, you know, sort of Henry VIII calling one of his wives the Flanders mare, you know, that does appeal well, especially to sort of like a blokey sense of humour, I suppose.
I think it's also, you can kind of see him saying it.
Well, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not being funny, but King Henry VIII wasn't one known to mince words particularly and get what he wants. And if she arrived and it wasn't quite as she had been portrayed in her portrait.
In the portrait, yes. Holbein took a lot of artistic licence by all accounts.
Exactly. I can kind of see him saying something like that privately. But whether Burnet would have actually have had that knowledge remains to be seen. But, yeah, again, artistic licence. You know, it may have been one way of emphasising a point of how dissatisfied Henry was. But we repeat it now as if it was something that literally flooded from Henry's lips.
Yeah.
And we don't know. That's the bottom line, is we don't actually know.
Whether we should take the word of Antonia Fraser. She is a well-respected author in the field. I've read a couple of her books, actually, and yeah, on that one.
Whatever, a lot of the mythology of King Henry VIII, this particular tale of the dogs licking the blood, actually does the starting point is Burnet. So that's where it comes from. But other people have built on that, in particular Agnes Strickland. She basically wrote, oh gosh, if you read it, it's completely gothic in her description of it. This is her description of it, is the king being carried to Windsor to be buried, stood all night among the broken walls of Sion, and there the leaden coffin, being cleft by the shaking of the carriage, the pavement of the church was wetted with Henry's blood. In the morning came plumbers to solder the coffin, under whose feet, I tremble while I write it, was suddenly seen a dog creeping and licking up the king's blood. If you ask me how I know this, I answer, William Greville, who could scarcely drive away the dog, told me, and so did the plumber.
Oh, well, yeah. You've got to trust your plumber, haven't you?
Yeah.
Oh, dear. Yeah. It goes on. I mean, myth and legend builds on myth and legend. Whether or not this happened or not is, who knows? It may well have happened. I mean, the coffin, he was very heavy. The coffin could easily have broken. Carriages, even the Queen, our Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, she states that even the coronation carriage is incredibly uncomfortable and jolty because it's only balanced on leather strapping. It's heavy, it's balanced on leather strapping. You feel every bump in the road, and these aren't roads that we know today. These are roads that are like rough roads or cobbled roads, you know.
Well, yeah.
These aren't good roads. So it's quite possible his coffin did break. It's quite possible he leaked.
Lead is a particularly soft metal, and a large box made of sheet lead, if you jolt it for long enough, and it will split. I'm pretty sure of it. I mean, so there's certain aspects in that story you can relate to.
You can understand certain points being fact, can't you, Paul?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But, yeah, it is what it is at the end of the day, isn't it?
It doesn't help that where this supposedly happened at Sion is where Catherine Howard had been imprisoned before she was chopped.
Before she met her maker.
And it was also around, they say it was the very day, it wasn't, it was around the 5th anniversary of her execution, where this particular instance was supposed to happen. So that adds another level, doesn't it? It's almost Catherine Howard's revenge, almost. You know, I don't know. It just adds sort of like another coincidence, macabre level to this already macabre circumstance.
It's a sort of chronicler's dream, isn't it? There's little bits and pieces, and you can see how they could weave quite a nice little tale from it.
Now, we know that 16th century embalmment did not call for completely draining a corpse of blood. We know that. Their embalming process wasn't as good as today's.
Right.
So it is quite possible that fluids would have leaked from King Henry.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't see why not.
But linking it to the sermon that was done, the prophetic sermon, and the past of the actual monastery where this happened, and apparently, allegedly, this is very big allegedly, in the last few days of King Henry's, before he passed, he wasn't very coherent. He was coming in and out of consciousness, and at one point he was supposed to have said monks, 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 right? We don't know if that's true or not, but again, it adds another level, doesn't it?
Well, it does, yeah. I mean, thinking about it, I think his sort of like demise, his passing was quite fraught towards the end, and he would have been in and out of consciousness.
Most definitely. Now, he remains in St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, with Jane Seymour on one side, Charles I the other. And on top of Charles I's coffin, there is a mini coffin of a short-lived child from Queen Anne on top of Charles I. We have photographs of that. We know that that's true. Now, when he was placed into this chapel, dear. The white wands of office were broken over his head, which is customary for every king or queen who holds that. They do that. And basically, everything was put in there that he was supposed to require for, daily use and daily masses. He wanted daily masses. Because I did not know this, even to his death, he was Catholic. He wasn't Protestant.
Yes, it's one of the biggest sort of misdemeanors. He broke from Rome, but he was still principally a Catholic. He formed the Church of England, but it was still under Catholic sort of principles. He just didn't want the interference of the Pope. This is where a lot of people get confused. But the religion at the time, even after he broke from Rome, was Catholic, but he was just the head of it. That is the only sort of real difference.
Yeah.
And the Protestantism, excuse my pronunciation, that developed afterwards, more during the reign of his daughter, like Elizabeth I. That's when things really started to divide, and the Protestant faith really started to come into its own.
And that was something I learned, because I kind of assumed that as soon as he broke from the Catholic Church, he became Protestant himself, but he didn't.
No.
He wanted daily masses to be said forever for him after he died. That's what he wanted. That didn't happen. I would just like to say. But things were put into his, coffin that allowed this to happen. I don't know. I suppose a bit like the Egyptians, they put stuff in there to take with them to the afterlife. I would imagine
you can
it's
certainly,
that kind of thing. But this is only a temporary thing as well. You've got to remember that this particular place he's been put is actually only a temporary tomb for him. It's not where he was supposed to end up.
Yeah.
Right? So he gets put in there, in St George's Chapel. Now, he had written a 1,400-word document that are the plans for his tomb to end up in Westminster Abbey. Right?
Okay.
None of that happened. A black marble sarcophagus that had been confiscated from Cardinal Wolsey by Henry was already at Windsor. Now, that's thanks to John Speed, a 17th century mapmaker and antiquarian, and in his book, The History of Great Britain, we understand that Henry was planning to use that for himself.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Makes sense, yeah.
So the plans were from Henry himself that he wanted effigies of himself and his queen as if they were sleeping angels, prophets, columns, scriptures, children with baskets of red and white roses scattering down from the tomb above, and the plume of blood. It would have been incredibly fantastic and fabulous and very Henry VIII, right?
Yeah.
It didn't happen. Now, this could be, remember the succession. His son was only very young when he succeeded the throne. You got a lot of power struggles. We were also skint. Henry, oh my goodness, he had basically bled the country dry. We were bankrupt pretty much.
Yeah.
Right? So this is an expense that may have been put on hold. We'll do it, but not quite yet. We can't afford it just yet. Right? Now, 250 years later, and it never ever happened. This, he's still at St George's Chapel. When you think of some of the other fantastic, tombs that there are in some of our amazing churches that we've got, it's astonishing to me that King Henry VIII hasn't got a tomb, wasn't put into a tomb. Now, 250 years later, they used this particular piece of sarcophagus for Horatio Nelson. So you can see what should have been used for King Henry VIII. It's actually got Horatio Nelson in it. And that's in St Paul's.
I wonder if King Henry's coffin was big enough for him to spin in his grave.
Well, if you actually look at when we saw the photographs, his particular coffin in St George's Chapel is a wreck.
Yeah, it seems to have sort of, I don't know, yeah, this again sort of gives credence to, it kept splitting and stuff. There probably is a lot of sort of gases produced after it. Perhaps he wasn't embalmed properly or whatever, because the coffin, the actual lead coffin sort of was collapsed in parts, bloated in others. So, there was a lot going on after he died.
There was an awful lot going on after he died, yeah, definitely. But that's why he stayed in St George's Chapel at Windsor, and it hasn't got a massive tomb sarcophagus thing going on in one of the cathedrals.
Because thinking about it, he's probably one of the most famous monarchs that everyone knows about, worldwide even. Yeah, and you go to anyone, name as a historic British monarch, and everyone will go, Henry VIII. But he has not got a tomb, has he?
Mm-mm. He's just got this coffin in a tomb
in a
at St George's Chapel. It's crazy, really, when you think about it.
Yeah.
Now,
and he had a song written about him, didn't he?
Who?
Herman's Hermits, Henry VIII. I'm Henry VIII, I am.
I wondered when you were going to bring that one up. You even gave us
That's why it's so famous.
Now, one other thought is that Henry would never face his own mortality, and he was very preoccupied with Tudor succession. So within that, he kind of overlooked himself in there. Although he wrote this document, it never come to fruition because a lot of work would have needed to have been done before he died on this tomb to have him interred, but it never happened. So it could be that, that was partly the reason as well. No work had been undertaken on it, so no one sort of continued it after. Once he's dead, right? We move on.
Well, yeah, I think
king.
even during his life, he had such influence and such a larger than life character. Perhaps the people around him couldn't envisage him actually dying, sort of thing. And you do get that with some people. You can't imagine sort of them going, can you?
No, this is true. This is very, very true. So it was also a treasonable offence to bring this topic up with the king. So before he'd even, thought about maybe dying, when he started to decline, it would have been treasonable to actually go up to the king and say, maybe we should start looking at your tomb now. Because, you just wouldn't do it. It was a very brave Sir Anthony Denny who actually told Henry on the 27th of January in 1547 that he was actually dying. And basically that just about gave him enough time for the last rites to be done on Henry in the first place. So we are literally talking hours before he dies now.
Yeah.
So, and for Denny to actually go up and say, sir, kind of think this is the last. If you make your peace with God now, you might be all right. Would have been classed as treasonable. But he was brave. He did it. God help him if he hadn't have died, is all I'm saying.
He made a recovery, oh dear.
Now, death masks. We went down a rabbit hole of death masks while we were talking about all of this after the show off last week. Now, this was an interesting one. When you Google the death mask of King Henry VIII, it does come up with varying death masks. What you're seeing is actually King Henry VII.
That's right, his father.
There wasn't one taken of King Henry VIII. Again, an anomaly in itself.
Yeah, because, you sort of are led to believe that death masks were taken of all the monarchs, aren't you?
You are. And the reason for this, they think the reason there was no death mask of Henry was because his death was actually kept secret for 3 days, right? Mm-hmm. When a king dies, particularly back in Tudor times, right? Not so much now, the succession is very, very clear, but back in the Tudor times and pre-Tudor, when we get into other kings, you're going to understand how awkward this becomes. Everyone jostles for power. The succession would be that King Henry VIII's son succeeds, Edward, correct?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Edward was 9, if I remember rightly.
Yes, very young, the boy king, yeah.
He was incredibly young. You have got a lot of powerful men vying for position and getting things in place. Bearing in mind, you've got a child king coming on the throne. There needs to be power behind the throne. And you've got a lot of people jostling for this power, consolidating their position.
Yeah.
So it was kept secret for 3 days while basically everybody was running around going, oh, I'm going to get myself into a strong position here. Right, now death masks are usually taken immediately after the person's deceased, right? Because otherwise decomposition sets in.
Yeah.
Now, Paul knows a little bit more about decomposition, don't you, sweetie?
Yeah, it's just basically the body breaking down. Obviously, after death, it just dies and, yes, like slowly breaks down. It's just natural and, but basically, we're just animals on the planet, and just like an animal would, when they die, they just lay down, die, and you've probably seen this on, like, roadsides and things like that, where the skin and flesh and stuff is just gone and you're just left with the skeleton.
So in regard to King Henry, knowing that he was very large, he had infected leg wounds, he was heavily retaining fluid, they think he had renal failure, he was obviously bloated and puffy. 3 days, when he dies, what happens to his face? What would happen? Would he be recognisable as the Henry that everybody?
Well, I mean, it depends on the skin condition as well, because they could have decided not to do it because if like he's got sores and stuff all over his face, they might have feared actually like doing the cast, and then when they pull the cast off, half his face comes off with it.
Yeah, and I think after about 3 days, as you're sort of like saying, Paul, a lot can sort of like happen, especially in the face. The eyes will become sunken. Your lips will probably recede. It probably unrecognisable. Probably wasn't a very flattering sort of.
And with the infections and stuff like that, obviously that keeps going because it's literally a life form of its own, and it'll just eat away as well. It'll carry on going and just get worse and worse. So if he had any of that on his neck, for example, that could have just grown up the side of his face, and it wouldn't have smelled very nice at all.
No, so he didn't have a death mask taken. Any death mask you see is modelled off of the death mask from his dad, which is Henry VII, and has been modified slightly to make it look a little bit more like King Henry VIII. That's basically what you're looking at if you see a death mask of King Henry VIII. In fact, if you Google it, only thing that comes up is King Henry VII.
Yeah, because when we was doing the research and you were sort of like looking into this and you were and you were cussing a bit, weren't you? Goes, I don't want Henry VII, I want Henry VIII. But then we found out why.
Well, when you bear in mind, his funeral literally took place 2 weeks after he died.
Yeah,
that's unusual. They usually took about a month before they then did that, right? There was usually a month between death and burial, whereas in King Henry VIII's situation, it was 2 weeks. And they assumed that it was the condition of the body that's why they buried him so quick.
I think that is more than likely. I think they thought, we've got to process this one pretty damn quick.
Very much so. Now, I would like to say I also looked into syphilis. King Henry VIII was allegedly supposed to be infected with syphilis. There is no proof of that. That's just, it's another assumption that he had syphilis. He was covered in sores. A lot of that was caused through gout. He had renal failure because of the bloating and the swelling and the colour he was, all things like that. Now, there is a death mask, alleged death mask, in the Tower of London. It's wooden, which doesn't make it a death mask, it makes it an effigy as she drops the mark and leaves the room.
No, I don't leave the room, because that means we've got to read the rest of the research.
I spent a lot of time on this, guys.
We'll just let her sort of bask in her glory there.
Yeah, that's it. Me and Richard can go and put our feet up, a cup of coffee. Very crack on.
Oh dear. Makes it an effigy, carved, not taken from the body, which is actually the definition of a death mask. Anyway.
Right, okay.
Found out a couple of interesting things. A couple of extras I thought I'd include, because just out of point of interest, really. I also found out bits of missing bodies. This was a whole fascinating research I ended up going down on this one. Queen Anne Boleyn, right? She was beheaded in 1536 on orders from King Henry VIII, right? Yeah. Because she apparently was, she was naughty and apparently was playing behind his back, right? That was what was said. But her heart was stolen from her body, and it was secretly hidden in a church in Thetford in Norfolk.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
No, I didn't know this either. Apparently it was rediscovered in 1836 and reburied under the church organs where it still remains.
That was quite a common theme, actually, because if you remember, Richard, we went to an abbey in Abbey Wood, London, and it's a ruin. And when the archaeologists were excavating it years ago, they actually found a box with a heart in it.
Yeah, say that was quite common practice during the Middle Ages, sort of particularly with noblemen. They would, they would have their hearts removed and placed under altars, or even taken, especially during the era of the Crusades, they would take their hearts to the Holy Land. It was a rite of passage, so they can have some earthly remains buried in some highly religious and significant place. There you go.
Another little interesting thing I found out whilst researching King Henry VIII. Sir Thomas More was beheaded in 1535. Now, he had upset King Henry VIII by refusing to acknowledge the king's marriage to Anne Boleyn, right? So he was beheaded. Nice. Mm-hmm. His head was taken from the scaffold, parboiled, then stuck on a pole and exhibited on London Bridge.
I like the way he put parboiled. It's like potatoes, isn't it?
Yeah. His daughter, Margaret Roper, she actually bribed the bridge keeper to knock it down, and she took it home. And she preserved the head in spices. But, unfortunately, she was betrayed by spies and was imprisoned herself. Now, Margaret died in 1544, and Sir Thomas's head was actually buried with her. But in 1824, her vault was opened, and More's head was then put on public display in St Dunstan's Church in Canterbury.
There you go. Is it still there today?
I don't know where it is, actually. It just said for many years. I didn't go any further. I was at this point, I thought I'd gone too far off topic and thought I'd better pull it back to what we were actually talking about in the show. So I don't know where it is now.
Maybe they part-boiled his head because he had dirty ears and he had spuds growing out of it.
A few eyes. No, I'm quite familiar with Canterbury Cathedral. I've been there a few times and I can't remember actually seeing a head, so probably not.
No, I can't either, to be fair.
No.
There's a ducking stall there, but...
that's in Canterbury. Yeah, that's right. I've been on that trip. Anyway, so that's where it was put on public display for many, many years. But I don't know what happened to it since. I would imagine they've reinterred it somewhere.
I would have thought so.
I would have thought that's the case. But that's what happened to Sir Thomas More's head. Nice.
Yeah.
I honestly don't think, but then again, I'm looking at it with modern eyes. I don't think I'd want something like that. Well, my father. I mean, I love my father dearly, don't get me wrong. I mean, my dad, amazing man in his own right, but I don't think I'd want to take his head home, even if he had been beheaded.
What do you mean, like, happy birthday, there's my head?
Yeah.
You can see, this sort of harks back to the Reddit show we done, isn't it? Sort of people sort of back then had a different sort of view of sort of remains of people. And, and even though they were religious, sort of figures, sort of like biblical type figures, the need to collect sort of relics and even of your dearly departed was relatively common, I should imagine.
Yeah, and if you think about the Screaming Skulls show we did, one of the cases there, I think it's the Agnes Burton skull, wasn't it? That where she said when she died she wanted her head put back into the house because she loved the house so much. And when that didn't happen, that caused all kind of craziness happening in the house until they actually did what she wanted to happen. So, yeah, you have got to look at it with, again, time perspective, isn't it? You've got to put yourself in the time of when this happened. For us now, we're going, oh, God, I can't even imagine it. But back then, like you say, it was probably quite common thing. And if you've got devotion, I suppose this goes back to, like you say, the holy relics, wanting that physical connection to that person.
Yeah. And, you know, so, yeah, you can see, you know, sort of that gives them reassurance and, you know, you think they're still around and stuff like that. And, yeah, and they may give you some sort of power, perhaps. You know, it's just a different perspective. And because what you've got to look at today, I mean, death is very sort of sanitised. I mean, you know, sort of once sort of someone, you know, sort of departs, and that is literally the last time you see them, isn't it? As such, you know, they're taken away, and you don't know much about the process that goes beyond that, do you? But back in sort of this day, it would have been sort of quite a process that had gone through, and it would have been viewed by a lot of people.
But also remember, burial. We buried our dead back then, or they buried their dead back then. Now we cremate, tend to cremate. I know you can be buried as well if you want to, but there are many methods of burial now, whereas back then it was burial.
Yeah.
We didn't cremate. Whereas now there's nothing left. You have the ashes, actually, don't we? We have ashes of it if you want them, of your beloved, that you can keep in an urn. My other half has got some of the ashes of both his father and his mother in his house. Or a pet, you get the remains of your pet, don't you, in an urn? Yeah. Which I suppose is the modern day relic now from cremation rather than a body part.
So I suppose I quite like the idea of being put into one of those tree pods.
Yes, I like that idea.
And then it's planted with your body's planted with this pod thing, or inside this pod. And out of that grows a tree, and the tree literally feeds off of your body as it breaks down.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I've heard of stuff like that.
For all intents and purposes, you become a tree.
Yeah, I love that idea.
It's like that advert years ago on a British TV, isn't it? I want to be a tree.
Or it's like with ashes, and can't they sort of make sort of like stones out of them, like a diamond type?
Yeah, they do diamonds and stuff. Yeah,
you can get them compressed, can't you, into a diamond?
Yeah.
I mean, you can get jewellery made out of the ashes quite a lot. Sometimes it's resin-based, it's put into the resin. Sometimes you can get compressed into a diamond. But memorial jewellery is quite a thing as well at the moment. So nowadays, our view of death is very, very different. In fact, if you took a Tudor person and brought them forward and said, this is what we do with our dead, they'll probably be oh my God, that's just horrific.
No, I think they'll go, you're witches.
Probably, yeah. Probably. That comes up later in the show, everybody, but we're going to move on. That's some of the macabre history I found out surrounding King Henry VIII. I would like to say, though, it's not just me who does this. We sit here on Skype quite often of an evening, and we've got a show idea, and we're all off looking at different aspects of the topic and bringing forward different ideas. So it's a collaboration between the three of us. It's not just one person doing it; it's the three of us doing it. So that we got to speak to Charles I as well with Barry and Connie. Yeah. Charles I, now he was a king, again a controversial king, bless him, between 1625 and 1649. Now, he wasn't a very good king. He was quite a shy man, but with his shyness, there was an insecurity there. So because of his own personal insecurity, because of his shyness, he ruled with a heavy hand. And he wouldn't allow collaboration with the Parliament. And this brought him into direct conflict with the Parliament, from my understanding of history, this is.
Yes, he sort of like inherited this position from his father. There's one thing you have to understand about the Stuart monarchs, all of them, in fact, they were very stubborn. That is sort of one trait that runs through a lot of them. And as you said, Charles I, and as you say, he was quite, he had a stutter as well, and he did sort of probably more than overcompensate in other ways. And the thing the constant sort of battle with Parliament was, again, things were differently sort of set up back then. I mean, the king ruled and what the king said went, but when the king needed to raise money, he would usually have to call a parliament to do it, who could levy the taxes on the populace. And basically, it was to do with a war in Scotland in 1641. King Charles sort of like recalled Parliament. He said, right, I want this. So they levied all the taxes, sort of got him the finances to go to war. And then he dissolved Parliament straight afterwards. And what you also have to understand is the MPs and stuff were getting a bit peeved with this. They're thinking, hang on, he calls on us for one thing, and as soon as he gets what he wants, he takes the power away from us. So this is the basic underlying sort of, during his early reign, is what's going on. His constant recalling of Parliament and then dissolving it.
It annoyed them a tad.
Just a bit. They actually went to war over it.
Yeah, and this actually is what provoked the Civil War in England.
Yeah.
He's the only king that has been tried for treason.
Yes,
it's quite a tragic tale, actually. I would like to say, when I was reading this, I had a lot of sympathy for Charles I. Bless him. I did feel sorry for him. I thought, gosh, bless you.
Oh, okay.
I did. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, you know, still to this day, a lot of people still got an affection for Charles. I mean, you know, you can see the sort of double sort of standard that was being exercised during his trial, particularly because he refused basically to answer any questions because he said, "On what right do you have to try me?
I am ordained by God."
Yeah, which is quite a defence when you look at it.
So the Parliament is taking quite a big step, aren't they? They're taking a massive step in going against the monarchy in this. And also, you've got to remember the populace are kind of like torn. They can understand the point, but their cultural understanding is the monarchy rules.
Yes.
So it is quite a thing. What were you, Richard, in the Civil War reenactments?
Me, I was a royalist. I fought for the Marquis of Winchester's regiment of foot. So I was a royalist, yes. Fighting for the cause of King Charles.
Oh, see? You're a royalist at heart over there.
Yeah,
see, this is why our lovely Richard knows so much about this. He knows this particular point of history quite... I didn't even bother looking at it. I thought, Richard will know this off the top of his head. He knows all of this. So you've got all of this. Anyway, he gets tried. He gets put on trial for treason, wasn't it?
Yes, they had him up against treason, basically against the British people, you know, for waging war, which is, you know, again, you know, Parliament actually were the victors, so the victors sort of, you know, they write the history, don't they? And Charles didn't help himself. I mean, he was captured and he was sort of held, but then they found out that he was in league with the Scots to raise another army to come down and continue the hostilities. Because with the English Civil War, it wasn't one war, it was actually 3 wars over the space of about 20 years. You know, they kept trying to resolve it, Parliament, you know, and they were prepared to resolve it, but Charles kept buggering it up for himself. His stubbornness kept coming through.
See, not good really. How in the end did he get captured?
The other side had their Weetabix.
He was actually he was betrayed, I believe, and I think the Scots actually did hand him over to Parliament. I'm not too sure and where he was, but they did hand him over. And by then, everything came to light, what was going on. So Parliament said, no, we're going to try him now. We're going to sort of try and resolve this. And it was a fait accompli, but they had to be seen to go through a quasi-legal process, which had never been done before. You've got to understand that. So there was a lot of sort of arm bending and behind the scenes. than this. But, people like Cromwell particularly were sort of pushing for it. And the death warrant, which is still on display in the Houses of Parliament, it's got something like 52 signatures on it. I mean, but a lot of those were quite reluctant to actually sign it.
There was still a lot of, support for Charles, actually, even at this point in Parliament. It was very torn, wasn't it? It really was.
Yes.
The people in power, the strongest people in Parliament, definitely weren't as strong as maybe history has written.
Well, yes, and even though the people who sympathised with the cause and who fought for the cause, the parliamentarian cause, when it came to this, they balked. They sort of, swallowed and thought, we're about to put a king on trial, which legally, even today, you cannot try the monarch. They cannot be accused of a crime. Even today, the Queen, technically, can, go and rob a bank, and there's nothing you can do about it.
I'd love to see her do it.
You can imagine.
So would I, yeah.
I would love to see that
The Queen
happen.
walking into a bank with a sawn-off shotgun.
Yeah.
No,
Give
but
me money.
as bizarre as it
Give me my
sounds,
money. It's her face on the front of it.
But she doesn't have the power then now that the kings or queens back then had. They don't have that power.
No, they're more. But we basically have a puppet monarchy now, this was the start of it. I mean, after Charles I, Charles II came in, like we had the Stuart dynasty, and it still was a bit up in the air of how much power was sort of in their hands, and it wasn't until the start of the 19th century with the Bill of Rights and stuff where Parliament really did take control of the country, and we have the system we pretty much have today.
So you think of it in that term, they haven't got a lot of chance of committing a crime, to be fair to them.
No.
Anyway, he was given 3 days to put his affairs in order once the decision was made to kill him, basically, and to say goodbye to his family. After the trial, he was taken by a sedan chair, which is a short distance to his old rooms at Whitehall Palace. He refused to see anybody but his children and his chaplain, who was the Bishop Juxon. And then the next day, the king was moved to St. James's Palace. He spent the day burning papers, praying, and saying sad farewells to his two youngest children, who was Henry, Duke of Gloucester, he was 9, and the Princess Elizabeth, who was 11. No mention of the other children, I would like to say.
No, they'd all gone into exile by then. They'd all sort of scarpered, pretty much. They were in hiding. Because they were a lot older, you're talking about who would become Charles II and his brother, who would become James II after his death. So they were both in hiding.
So the two youngest are not a threat, basically, to anybody.
Not.
So that's why he was allowed to see those.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the morning of Tuesday the 30th of January, the king rose early. He dressed for icy weather. He asked for a thicker than normal shirt so that he wouldn't shiver. He didn't want people thinking he was scared.
Yeah. The traditional sort of story behind that is he wore 2 shirts. That's always sort of like a legend or story that's usually around that sort of aspect of his execution. Yeah. Which they do actually still have, allegedly, one of the shirts, which is currently on display at the London Museum, which he wore at these execution. I mean, a lot of sort of people have looked at it sort of since, and they do actually believe it was that it is one of his shirts. It's probably a bit frayed round the collar, you can probably imagine, but
wasn't there one of those at the English Civil War Museum?
I don't think so, no. There was a few artefacts, but no, I don't think there was any sort of fabric sort of artefacts. There's a wheelchair there, and that was Sir Thomas Fairfax's wheelchair.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, that was quite a
monstrosity. Around the museum, Richard. That was like...
At that point, he then retired with Bishop Juxon to pray until the knock came on his door at 10 a.m. On that note, we're going to take a quick break. Rejoin us just after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Now, we've just left King James in his room with the Bishop Juxton waiting for that knock on the door that came at 10 a.m. Now, Charles, the Bishop, and his attendant walked across St. James's Park. He was surrounded by guards. He wore a black cloak. He was then taken up to his bedchamber at the Whitehall Palace to await the summons to the scaffold. 3 hours later, that came. Oh, my God, that must have been horrendous.
You think about it, yeah. Yeah. What are you talking about?
It's like waiting for your crystals to arrive, Kerry.
Honestly, that's bad enough. If I was waiting to go to my dad, I'd be like, just get over it. Just do it already. I don't want to be waiting around. Like, if you're going to chop my head off, just do it. Right? You're 3 hours of waiting. Can't bear.
That's it. I mean, we've had a running commentary all week about your crystals. Started off with Pakistan, and then went to, I don't know, around the world in 70 days.
They're now at Stansted Airport. They've been across the UK, not just like the world. They've been across the UK.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm like, where are my crystals? Okay, they're in Stansted. That's closer.
Yeah.
I still haven't had a notification of what the delivery date is, though. They're still set at Stansted. I'm half a mind to go there myself and pick them up, but they probably won't be able to find them. You know what it's like. Anyway, poor old Charles waiting for 3 hours. He then walked across the banqueting hall beneath the Rubens ceiling painting. He had actually commissioned that from Rubens himself. He was actually a bit of an arts buff. A lot of our paintings and stuff is actually down to Charles.
Well, yeah, a lot of the Queen's collection now, he sort of started, he was quite sort of like a Renaissance man of his time, and a lot of what the royal family have now, sort of like paintings, historic sort of things, he actually collected.
A huge crowd had gathered for this, massive crowd had gathered for this, but it was an absolutely freezing cold day, and his speech, it's a little short speech that he made on the scaffold, actually got lost to the wind and they couldn't hear it, which is a bit of a shame, really. And the only bit that we know, he said, he at one point he went, I go from a corruptible to an incorruptible crown where no disturbance can be, no disturbance in the world.
Yeah, that is the quote that is often said. So, yeah.
Bless him. Now, the scaffold itself was erected against the banqueting hall in Whitehall, and the scaffold was hung around with black cloth. In the centre was a blackened and sanded floor. It's like a stage. It's like a stage, isn't it? You're walking onto a stage. So you've got the sanded floor, stood the axe and a lower quartering block of a kind used to dismember traitors. 2 men, heavily disguised with masks, stood ready to perform the act. Now, the official executioner, Brandon, that's the only name I could find, just Brandon is the official executioner, couldn't be found on this day. And the job went to these 2 guys. Now, they were heavily disguised because they didn't want repercussions at a later date, in case all this goes horribly wrong for Parliament, that they are the ones that executed a king. So that nobody kind of wanted that job. That was the other thing I found out about this. So the 2 guys who ended up doing it were heavily disguised, and the official executioner was like, I'm going to just going to the pub. I'm going to hide.
I'll leave that to you guys. I'm having nothing to do with this.
His hair was bound in a white nightcap. This is the king, obviously. He took off his cloak, laid down. He told the executioner he would say a short prayer, and then he gave a signal that he was ready. The executioner did sever his head in one clean blow. The reaction from the crowd was aghast. It was said that there was such a groan by the thousands present that I have never heard before, and I desire that I never hear again.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the final realisation for a lot of people there. It must have been such a surreal sort of like occasion that was going on.
I think they thought probably even to the last minute that there would be a reprieve for the king.
And you think for a lot of people there, it would have been the first time they'd ever seen their king.
Yeah.
A time to see him.
What a spectacle. But also how against everything that you've been brought up with the monarchy is anointed and ordained by God. No higher power than God. And yet we're chopping off his head. The person that's been put in that position by God, and we've just chopped his head off. You know, I think that the repercussions in the psyche of people probably would have been huge.
Yeah.
Quite frankly. I mean, God, Cromwell, he's been painted as being quite non-touched by this character. Do you know what I mean? He doesn't seem to have cared. He was like, he believed wholly in what he was doing, taking the power away from the king and giving it to the parliament. It's very self-serving in that. And he comes across as a very stubborn in his own right kind of character who so believed what he was doing was the right thing. But I don't believe any man in that age would have been untouched by the enormity of what they undertook.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly took guts for them to do, and a lot of them, sort of were not happy with it.
Not really. However, spectators, get this is gross, were allowed to go up to the scaffold, pay a small amount, dip their handkerchiefs in the king's blood, because they believed that the blood of a king, when wiped onto a wound or an illness, would actually cure it.
Yeah. Yeah, quite sort of, the touch of a king was often, sort of looked upon, or a touch of a monarch, was often looked upon as having healing qualities. And it's not the first time I've heard of this. Even was it Louis the XVI during the French Revolution, and the same happened there. Spectators were dipping the handkerchiefs in the blood after they guillotined him. So again, it's a relic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's something tangible.
Yeah. But the belief system, he's touched by God. That will cure all illnesses. That's still very prevalent. And they're willing to pay for this. But then, paying for artefacts off the scaffold was nothing new. We found that out in the gallows show that we did. They would pay for pieces of clothing from the deceased, wouldn't they?
It's usually a perk of the jailer or executioner, the sort of, they would probably paid a set fee, and anything else they would just take the money, and if people were offering to pay for this, they would say, just slip us a few shekels and off you go.
Exactly. So this is what happened on the scaffold. So what happened to his funeral? What happened in regards to his funeral? Now, there's two very different versions of this, quite frankly. One person says that it was a very small, private, no pomp, no ceremony. He was basically transported to St. George's Chapel and buried there. Yeah. And because of the way he died, it was very, very quietly done. Mm-hmm. However, a 17th century author, and I can't even say this word, Athenaea Oxenesis. I think I'm pretty much there on that one. Disagrees with Clarendon. He says that the burial was a quiet affair, but the procession from St. James's Palace to Windsor was big. It was quite a procession.
I can see it going either way. I mean, perhaps a lot of people would have joined. It all depends. It probably wasn't an official procession, but like anything, I think a lot of people would have sort of followed on afterwards.
Quite possibly. I suppose you don't know, do you? Again,
it's
the ripple effect, isn't it? We've done this on the scaffold, and then, oh gosh, we better pay our respects. You know what I mean? But there's a big difference between the elaborate ceremony that was supposed to have taken place to a quiet, non-pomp affair. One thing is for sure, though, as they approached St. George's Chapel, a freak snowstorm occurred. And all of a sudden, the king's coffin was covered in thick white snow. And they say that's the colour of innocence. And this is actually portrayed in a famous painting. It's by Croft. He portrayed that scene, and that's actually where that myth comes from. We don't know. Everyone agrees that happened. Whether it did or not, you would have had to have been there to believe it, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, it was in January, and snow, does fall in January. So, yeah, that is widely accepted of what happened.
Whether it was heavy enough to cover the coffin remains to be seen. I don't know anyway. It's that. He is in the same vault as King Henry VIII. And in 1813, Sir Henry Halford actually opened the coffin of Charles. He's a royal surgeon. And to perform an autopsy on the body. And what was left of that body remains to be seen, right? Mm-hmm. He secretly stole Charles's fourth cervical vertebra while he was doing it.
I think it's funny and what he used it for and all.
Oh, dear. For 30 years, he actually liked to shock his friends at dinner parties by using the vertebra as a salt holder.
Yeah, pass the salt, please.
And this is Charles I's vertebra. There you go. Oh, now there's a piece of macabre history for you. However, Queen Victoria heard of this, demanded that the bone be returned to Charles's coffin immediately, and it was.
Yeah, that's the classic. I am not amused.
That is a classic. How dare you?
With or without the salt?
Yeah.
I would imagine without. I imagine it was probably done very quickly as well.
Yeah.
What a thing to do. But one thing I will say in that particular, I say autopsy, I mean, you're looking at bones at this point, it was verified that the head was severed cleanly at that point. So that's how we know he was severed in one blow quite nicely, because that
makes
is backed up.
It makes you wonder what they use for a candle holder.
Bless him. Poor King Charles I. I mean, that's disrespectful, but then all of it is really, to be fair, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
And on a side note, we have a look at Oliver Cromwell. Good old Ollie.
Yep.
Yeah.
He died in 1658 at the age of 59. Now, his death was complications relating to a form of malaria and a kidney stone disease. That's painful. Both of those
there you go, Kerry.
That's karma.
You've got something in common with Oliver Cromwell now.
I do. Kidney stones, lovely.
And me.
Very painful. I can verify this. Incredibly painful. And it causes a lot of other problems as well. It's incredibly uncomfortable. Anyway, so he didn't die a nice death. He was in a lot of pain. I think there's a bit of karma gone on there, to be fair. Now, the funeral procession for Cromwell was a very grand affair. Right? Cromwell, people loved him. They gave him that pomp and ceremony, and they actually modelled it on similar funeral processions for kings.
Yeah.
It was very elaborate. People watched the carriage. It passed between Somerset House and Westminster Abbey, and that's where he was buried. Now, although he refused the crown, he was offered the crown, but he refused it. So he didn't want to be a monarch. That wasn't why he did what he did. He wanted Parliament to be dealt with fairly, I suppose.
Well, yeah, he wanted Parliament to be the ruling sort of, democracy of the country. Well, the ruling sort of faction of the country, yeah. And as you say, he was offered the crown, and he was quite annoyed when they did, because it would have gone totally against everything he fought for.
Yeah, in this procession, in his funeral procession, the effigy on top, he was dressed in robes with a crown, orb, and a sceptre. And he would not have been amused by that.
No, probably not.
He really wouldn't. He has got a death mask.
Yep.
There is a death mask of Oliver Cromwell. Now, when he was basically the leader of the country. And, funnily enough, succession then was the same.
Yes.
Weirdly. So his son, Richard Cromwell, succeeded Oliver.
Yes.
But he he didn't really want it. He was crap, quite frankly. He wasn't the man his father was.
He was not very effective, and nobody really liked him. And Richard Cromwell, yeah, bless him, he goes down in history of having the nickname of Tumble Down Dick.
Oh, bless him. Now, he gave up the power, and this is when Charles II was restored. See, it gets complicated, everybody. He was then restored as the King of England. Now, this is what we know as the Restoration, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
God,
and he weren't too happy.
Well, Charles
Revenge is sweet.
Ooh, it certainly was. He then decreed that Cromwell was be disinterred from Westminster Abbey, and he shall be executed for regicide.
Yeah.
Right? What is regicide?
That's when you kill a monarch.
Get rid of a king, kill him off.
So Charles was like, I ain't having none of this. We're gonna take my revenge. The bodies of Cromwell, Henry Ireton, the general in Parliamentary Army during the Civil War, and John Bradshaw, who was the President of the High Court of Justice, were removed from their graves. I don't suppose they cared much, but it was very symbolic at the time. Now, they were hanged in chains at Tyburn, then they were beheaded. Their bodies were then thrown into common graves, and their heads were placed on spikes above Westminster Hall.
So yeah, it's like a posthumous execution. They've gone through the sort of King Charles I had sort of given them traitors' deaths, really, posthumously.
Post death, as I say, I don't suppose they really cared when they're sitting wherever they're sitting in heaven or hell or wherever they were. They're going, how dare he take me from my tomb, my bones, pretty much by now, and do this. I mean, God, I don't suppose they cared much. Anyway.
No, they were sitting on clouds talking to Mary Poppins and having a cuppa.
Now, during a storm in 1685, Cromwell's head reportedly fell from the spike and was thrown to the ground. Love that. Now, since then, the head has been reportedly been through numerous hands, private and museum collections. It's even been put on display numerous times. And eventually, it was buried at Sydney Sussex College at Cambridge University.
Yeah.
Apparently. However, there is a however on this one. Historians have been unable to agree on whether this is actually his head and that whether or not it was his body that was hanged at Tyburn.
Yeah, there's sort of... there is sort of like discussion, because his supporters and stuff, they probably would have known. Oh, we've got the hound.
The dog is saying it was. The dog
agrees.
He's disagreeing with that point, Richard. Okay. Yeah, all right. Can we have finished?
Yeah, it's
okay.
not hold
Carry on.
No,
it's probably a car driven down the road or
something.
And
there is talk that quite possibly their bodies were, well, particularly Cromwell's, was removed from his grave before the King's men got to him. But, that's all supposition. I mean, I've seen photos of the head and stuff. I mean, true, it could be anyone's, but, I like to think it's Oliver Cromwell's.
I have to say, so do I. Anyway, there is a little thing regarding some busts that were made of Charles and of Cromwell. Now, outside the wall of St. Margaret's Church, which is next to Westminster Abbey, there is a lead bust of King Charles I. Right. It sits above a blocked-off doorway, and it faces the Houses of Parliament, specifically the statue of Oliver Cromwell. Now, Cromwell is actually in the Parliament grounds, and his head is bowed, right, which is said to be in thought. But there is a claim that it was placed, or the placement of these busts, is so Cromwell is avoiding the gaze of Charles I.
Yeah, I don't know. It could have been.
Shame.
Yeah.
However, this is the dates don't add up on this one, right? Cromwell's statue was erected in 1899. Okay, and it was designed by Sir William Thornycroft. He was keen on Cromwell. He liked Cromwell. So he wouldn't have designed a statue that would have shown shame or regret. He would have done it. It's probably more of Cromwell with thought for the best for the country, because that's his affiliation. That was Thornycroft's affiliation. He wouldn't have done something that would have made him seem shameful. The bust of King Charles I wasn't donated to the church until 1956.
Yeah.
60 years later. So this mythology, or this tale that King Charles I is staring down on Oliver Cromwell, and Cromwell is ashamed of his act. It's not true, everybody. Dates don't add up on this one.
There you go.
All I'm saying. Right, now we come to Richard III. Let's skip again. We're going back in time to 1483. Now, if you want to know about succession and wars, I got so confused around this. This is the War of the Roses, isn't it?
Yeah, don't ask me to explain it either.
I don't think anybody can with any sort of layman term. It basically a lot of arguing, a lot of big battles, a lot of fighting, a lot of transfers of power, lots of people jollying for position and power and switching sides and arguing. Oh, it goes on basically.
Because what you have to remember, what a lot of people get confused about, they think, it's called the Wars of the Roses, and they think it's just sort of one conflict over a relatively short period of time. It's not. It's a dynastic conflict involving many characters over a prolonged period of time. There wasn't actually that many battles. There was only about 8, but these sort of was pretty much spread, so it was sort of more sort of things would calm down and then they would sort of re-emerge, and this was all over about a 40-year period. So, yeah, you can't sort of look at it as a war in the traditional sense.
No, not at all. Go and have a look at the War of the Roses for anybody interested out there. You will understand exactly what we're saying on this one. It's a nightmare, quite frankly, trying to work it all out. One thing you do need to know is, though, Richard, born to a well-to-do family, that family does lots of different manoeuvres to advance their power, their cause, their land and their wealth throughout the early years. Yeah. Richard is brought up in this and does a lot himself to forward himself, okay, to get to the position he was in when Edward V took power. So he's jockeyed for position and got a lot of power, a lot of wealth, a lot of land by the time we get to the point where Edward V, who was only a boy of 12, succeeded. Correct?
Yeah.
Now, Richard was designated the Lord Protector in the late King's will, and he swore allegiance to the new king at York. The Royal Council, dominated by the Dowager Queen's family, the Woodvilles, Elizabeth Woodville, very famous character in her own right, decided to crown Edward V at once, right? Stop all the arguments. My son is king, or we're going to get him crowned. This young boy of 12.
Puts his mother, usurps Richard's sort of like inherent right to be Lord Protector. Yeah. So you can see these sort of underlying sort of tensions coming to a head there.
Yeah.
The Queen is trying to outmaneuver Richard, who has been assigned to be the king, all but king in name until his charge is old enough to take responsibility.
Yeah, and this is where it becomes an issue, right? This is one of the reasons. Now, God, again, it gets really complicated. But the Woodvilles have basically come from quite a lowly background to a meteoric rise in power. Elizabeth Woodville's story in herself, you need to look into that. We'll go into it a little bit if we get time. But there's a lot of jockeying for power. You understand that, right? A lot of meteoric rises into power and other falls from power and stuff like that go on. So, but this is what happens. She wants her son crowned immediately, which overrides anything the previous king had said.
Yeah.
Right? So it keeps her in power.
Yeah, and she's, but usually, like Dowager Queens, which are sort of, the queens from the deceased monarch, they usually just go into retirement. They usually pension them off and put them on an estate somewhere. But this one was sort of like causing a bit of a stink.
Yeah, She wanted to maintain her power. She was not going to retire quietly into the background, this woman. Now, they thought Richard was his friend. They kind of went with that, and thought that Richard was on their side. And the Earl Rivers arranged to meet Richard with the Duke en route from Shropshire to London. Right? He seized Edward V, dismissed his household, and then placed Rivers and Edward's half-brother, the Lord Richard Grey, in custody. The two children are then in custody. No, sorry, Edward and his cousin is in custody. Again, confusing everybody. There's a lot of cousins and uncles and stuff go on. Now, he asserts his loyalty to Edward. Richard escorts him to London. That's recognised by the Royal Council as his protector. Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's going according to plan. And then he becomes head of government. So Richard is now head of government. The Queen and her daughters and Edward's younger brother, also called Richard, can see why I get confused at this time, right? They take refuge in Westminster Abbey. They basically, you can't touch them. What's it called? Sanctuary.
Seat sanctuary, yeah.
So once they're in Westminster Abbey, unless they can't go in and arrest them, they can't go in and do anything to this family, they can go in and if Elizabeth Woodville agrees, she can meet with people and stuff, but if not, she can't. And you don't upset the law of sanctuary. That's it.
No.
Right?
It was quite well written. You could have people in to entertain or to negotiate or whatever, yeah, but no, you couldn't forcibly remove them from the church.
You can't. So that's where she took sanctuary with the rest of the family, including Edward's younger brother Richard. Now, bearing in mind the succession would go, if Edward dies, Richard then would become king. So you can understand why. But Richard is going along with the fact that Edward is going to be coronated as king. Right? So everybody's thinking, that's fine, we're all okay, Richard's following what should happen, Edward's going to be king, blah, blah, blah. Now, preparations for the coronation go ahead. Richard then executes Hastings, which for basically treasonable conspiracy. Now, that is Edward's most devoted supporter. So that's the power behind Edward. He takes it away, basically, by executing him. And then goes to the church, says Richard needs to be at the coronation of Edward. We need to have him there. It shows strength of support in the king's line. Right? It's going to look weird if Richard isn't there. One of the family has to be there. It's got to be the next king in line. Right? Yeah. So he then takes Richard. Elizabeth gives Richard to Richard.
Okay.
Right? So now he's got both princes in his power. He's got the line of succession, the two next kings, under his power. He puts them in the Tower, and then on June the 26th, he usurps it all and basically says, no, it's going to be me who's king with my Queen, and it's him who gets coronated at Westminster Abbey on July the 6th. So the two princes are now in the Tower. Richard is now king. Right? Now, there are reasons why he did this. He didn't just do this because he thought, I fancy being king. There were reasons for this. He actually thought that, the previous king's children were illegitimate. And this was because there was a pre-contract of betrothal to Lady Eleanor Butler. Right, now a betrothal was as binding as marriage at that time. Now that would have proved, if that had been the case, he would not have been free to marry Elizabeth Woodville. So when he did marry Elizabeth Woodville, it actually made her not queen and her children not legitimate. They would have been illegitimate. Illegitimate children can't inherit the throne.
That's right. Oh, right, I see. So the betrothal before, sort of, even though they didn't get married, was still more binding than the marriage then?
Apparently so. But there is no evidence to support this claim of betrothal. It was never adjudicated by a church court, which would have to be to make it illegally binding. Right, so it's shaky.
Yeah, you can see why they've sort of like chroniclers ever since have sort of raised an eyelid at that.
There's the mental gymnastics.
Yeah.
of why he was right to inherit the throne. Richard, was right to inherit the throne. Oh, so it gets ever so confusing, everybody. There's a lot of Richards, Edwards and Henrys around this time of history. Oh, dear. But not just that, but if Edward IV himself was illegitimate, that was an allegation that had been put out twice before and was not wholly incredible. The children of Richard's elder brother George were supposedly disqualified by his condemnation. Oh my God, it gets very confusing, everybody. But, oh, you're illegitimate, you can't have it. He shouldn't have had it in the first place. He married her and he shouldn't have married her. And blah is all I can say. So anyway, but this is why they think Richard took the steps he did and did the fait accompli that he did, and the coup d'etat, as it's been called. But by having the two children in his power in the Tower, Tower of London's never fallen.
Yeah, but you can see Richard in a way sort of thinking, this is getting really messy, I'm going to draw a line under this. But this is how it's going to be.
Exactly. I've had enough of this. I'm just going to take it, right?
But then according to Richard III last week, he didn't do it.
To be fair, if they're illegitimate, they're no threat to the crown.
No.
Because they're illegitimate. So there was no reason for him to kill them.
Yeah.
Because they don't pose a threat.
They don't pose a threat.
The only threat they pose is if somebody puts power behind them. So by keeping him in the Tower safely, they can't garner support and cause a war, for argument's sake, yeah. But he's already got them under his control, his power. There's no need to kill them. They're illegitimate. He's got them safe so they can't cause trouble and raise support. There's no need for him to kill them.
Maybe he didn't kill them and it was just an accident. Because, you know, like most kids, when you go to, like, a ruin, they're climbing up the walls and all sorts. And maybe they did that and just fell.
They were definitely killed at some point.
They were definitely
they
disappeared
killed.
Anyway. There was,
and actually, as they got older, they would have become more dangerous. No matter where they were, they would have become more dangerous.
They would have got supporters from somewhere. And they could have caused another civil war.
Exactly. So, but at the point of him taking the crown, he's in a very powerful position. He's got a lot of supporters himself. There's a lot of people going, yeah, Rich, off you go, you do this. So he's got a lot of supporters. And actually, for the good of the country, it would have been more beneficial to have an adult leader rather than a child. Having a child leader never pays. There's too much power struggles go on and conspiracy behind the scenes. It gets murky.
Yeah.
But bearing in mind, they've gone through so many years of upheaval in the country as it is. They're trying to get a solidification. Is that the word?
Yeah. They're trying to, consolidate and just try and bring some sort of stability. Because back in those days, I mean, wars and to go to war and stuff, it cost a lot of money. They bankrupt your country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the taxes and everything. And actually, if you look at some of the policies that Richard was wanting to bring in, they were for the good for the people. It would have been lesser taxes. It would have ended the wars, which have meant, we were so many men killed and stuff like that. There was a lot of things that he was would have wanted to have brought in that would have been for the good of the populace. So on the whole, if he'd continued, it could have been a very prosperous and stable time for the country. However, that kind of didn't happen.
No.
Right. Now, as for the princes in the Tower, they disappeared, or they think they were certainly killed around 1483 in the summer. That's when they were disappeared. It was never like confirmed or denied. They just kind of disappeared. They sort of went to the Tower and nobody heard from them again. And they kind of think it was around 1483 in the summer. Everyone was operating on the fact that they were dead. Richard never actually denied that. He never denied it. He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it. A lot of people blame Buckingham at the time, but obviously the one who's got the power is the one who takes the blame. and that would be Richard. But whether or not he gave the order remains to be seen, because again, we get very murky. Because on the 22nd of August in 1485, at the Battle of Bosworth, Richard III led a mounted cavalry charge against Henry Tudor in an attempt to kill him and end the conflict. Because again, King Henry, Henry had come over, landed in Wales, basically saying, you've upset my crown, I want it back. And there was a big battle that ensued. Now, when Richard entered the foray, when he entered the battle, he was in a very powerful position. He had actually the majority of troops. He was very strong.
Mm-hmm.
And then people went against him. He was double-crossed on the battlefield and ended up with around about half, disappearing on him. And then all of a sudden he went from this point of we're going to beat everybody to, oh my God, where's all my troops gone? They're now over there.
There's one thing about medieval battles, sort of like you've got to get sort of like straight. If you do side with one, the best strategy you can employ if you're an earl and stuff and you're sort of like donating troops is you've got to be on the winning side.
Yeah.
Got to be.
This is why medieval sort of battles were very fraught with allegiances. They would be with you 1 minute, but if the battle started to turn, they would just go over to the other side.
Which is kind of what happened. So he gets kind of left with farting in the wind, basically, with a very small contingency. And basically, at this point in the battle, his only defence is to go head-to-head with Henry Tudor. That's his only way of winning this battle, going head-to-head with Henry Tudor, killing Henry, and then taking the battlefield, basically, as he's won. That's the only way he's got to.
The old, like, chivalrous way to actually settle the dispute. And, I believe Richard actually rode off with his entourage to actually seek Henry Tudor out. And, and he sort of came to grief along the way.
He was surrounded by Tudor supporters who cut him down. Now, reports generally agree that blow or blows to the head killed Richard III. Some say the Welsh foot soldiers did it, but we don't actually know for sure.
It was Edmund Blackadder.
Pardon?
It was Edmund Blackadder.
It was Edmund Blackadder, everybody, we've decided.
Yeah.
Now, his body got lost. No pomp and ceremony, no burial that we knew of. We knew roughly where but we didn't know where exactly it got lost. We didn't know until it got found by archaeologists. Not that long ago. This is the body that was found under the car park, under a big R, funny enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Now, they started to excavate this particular area because they wanted to find the position of Greyfriars monastery. That was very influential. That's what they were actually looking for, and that's where they started digging in the first place. And then they came across this grave, and they think it was Richard III's skeleton. Now, they've done a lot of work on this, and kudos to actually everybody, archaeologist-wise and forensics and all that, because this has opened up so much information about his death that we didn't know before.
It is, it is an incredible discovery. It is sort of one of the, the archaeological discovery of the century.
What did they find, Kerry?
A skeleton. Kerryism right there for you.
Yeah.
Now, his skeleton actually tells us that he sustained several blows to his head from a number of different bladed weapons. Right, so that suggests that he was attacked from all sides by more than one person. Surrounded on the battlefield. Mm. Now, none of the skull injuries could have been inflicted by someone wearing a helmet or, armour on his head. So that suggests he lost his helmet, or it was removed.
Well, if he was going for combat, sort of medieval helmets are very constrictive, and a lot of people on the battlefield would discard them pretty quick when they actually went into combat, because it was sort of more dangerous to wear one and not it would just restrict your vision. when you went into combat, and it is
cumbersome, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Armour.
cumbersome. It's something you don't need. It's something you wear for show and from a distance, but once you get into the fray, you will start discarding stuff that gets in your way, and a helmet would.
Yeah, it would do that. And also, you've got to remember that a lot of pre-battle posturing goes on.
Yeah.
A lot of pre-battle posturing goes on. And also you've got arrows and stuff like that, right? And that's protecting you from that. But once you're in the fray, once you're actually fighting, you're fighting for survival. And when you fight for survival, you don't want something that's going to stop you from fighting to your best ability. And armour's great, but it's also very heavy. It's very cumbersome. And you can't fight to the best of your ability. So like Richard says, you discard it. Believe it or not, you would end up discarding it because you're fighting for your survival. Yeah. Now, one massive fatal blow to the base of the skull, they think, was caused by a weapon called a halberd.
Right.
Okay. There is very few wounds to the rest of his body. There's no defensive wounds on his forearms or his hands. So that points evidentially to the fact that he was wearing armour, because the metal would have actually borne the brunt of those blows. Yeah. So you might get broken bones or bruising, but you wouldn't have necessarily nicks and stuff like that from weapons.
Particularly interesting that one of the wounds was, they believe, from a halberd. That's a long, like, pole arm. Going by this, for me, it was quite obviously he was toppled from his horse. They somehow got him off his horse. He got to the ground. His only exposed part would have been his head. Yeah. And that's what they went for. Yeah.
Now, some of the wounds would have been difficult or impossible to inflict if Richard was still wearing his armour. So therefore, they think those kind of wounds were delivered once he was dead. So basically, as soon as he was dead, they did a few more kicks and stabs and stuff. And one particular wound, a stab through the buttocks, they think was a symbolic insult injury that was delivered after he was dead. Now, when he died, they stripped him naked, laid him on a horse with his arms and legs dangling down both sides, and that's when they think that insulting blow was delivered by a Lancastrian soldier as he's paraded back to Leicester.
Yeah, they would have paraded the body in front of all the rank and file, and you can imagine someone stepping out and sort of, I don't know, chucking something at it or whatever,
So there's a lot of that gone on. Now, he was buried at this Franciscan friary. Very little respect into the grave's preparation. So when you look down into the grave, the body isn't there anymore, the skeleton isn't there anymore, right, but the grave is. So you can see how small it is.
Right. Okay.
They've removed the skeleton and reinterred that, but they've got modern technology, everybody. They've got like a projection that shows where the skeleton would have laid, how it would have laid in the grave, which is incredibly interesting. It's a really small grave, and it shows how short the king's head is quite short, so the king's head was forced forwards and upwards. It's awkward. It's just been thrown in there.
Oh, I think, they've just hastily dug a hole and thrown the body in there,
Now, they reckon the reason this was done was because obviously King Henry, they stopped there and they have to bury him quick. They don't want no pomp, no ceremony. They're just going to chuck him in a grave. But because it was so poorly done, compared to other examples of medieval graves, they can judge it from other graves. They think that the monks had to quickly dig it themselves, overseen by Henry's impatient soldiers. Henry is not wasting time. He does not want to be lurking around. He wants it done and dusted. So they've had to quickly bury the grave. It's not even that deep, this grave. It's literally, when they looked at the archaeology of this, the excavation around the grave, they uncovered a medieval floor that was merely 2 metres from the grave, and that would have covered the floor of the choir. So it's not... Do you see what I mean? When it's in relation to it, it's very shallow.
It's a very hastily prepared grave, and as you say, Kerry, I mean, Henry, he needs to get to London and assert his power there and then, doesn't he? Yeah. He's got bigger fish to fry.
He needs to claim that throne as quickly as he possibly can. He's not got time to waste. So that's why they think it was the friars that dug the grave themselves, overseen threw the body in there, done. right? We're done. And then obviously as time goes on, the friary becomes disillusioned in Henry VIII's time. It gets torn down. It gets built on in more modern times. I mean, above it, I actually found this fascinating. 90 millimetres above the king's legs, the archaeologists hit upon the foundations of an 18th century outhouse, right? 90 mil. If they'd gone any deeper with foundations and stuff, it would have just destroyed the grave. They would never have discovered it.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Somewhat sort of
it.
9 centimetres. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah. Now that contained a coal store, a toilet, and a storage space. That's half a spade.
Yeah.
In depth. Right? Now, in the mid-20th century, now these outhouses were cleared and a garage and a new coal store were put on their place. And again, luckily enough, the builders just simply built on the earlier construction, didn't go any deeper.
Imagine being the people that owned the coal, thinking now that your coal shed was above the last Plantagenet King of England.
Yeah. And not just that, but then when that goes, they then put the car park on top of it.
Yeah.
Again, just chucking it on top of what was already there, not going down any deeper for excavation. All of these things could have ruined that archaeological history, and it wasn't. It's just phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah. It certainly seems to be. He had someone looking over him. I mean,
definitely. Himself, probably. And now, it was noted the feet are nowhere to be found.
Right,
his feet are missing. Now, the tibia shows that the feet were still in place when the king's body was laid to rest, but the whereabouts is still a mystery. They don't know where they've gone.
Oh, right.
So there's no bones of feet in there. Weirdly. But the grave is undisturbed. For all this building stuff, that the actual grave was intact. It wasn't like part of it, half of it was sort of not, and half of it was. Like, the whole grave is intact, but his feet were missing. I don't know what happened to his feet.
Oh, okay.
But there's no signs on the bones, as far as I'm aware, that they were removed. They're pretty sure, because of the state of the tibia, that he was intact when he went into that grave.
Whether that's just a freak of geology, perhaps the bottom of the grave may have gone into a more acidic type soil and it dissolved the bones.
No idea. It's a mystery. That's the mystery of it all, really. Now, oh dear. I think that's a phenomenal case of archaeology, don't you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it is quite a story. I was actually watching off the back of this when I sort of saw the research you done, Kerry. I sort of went over to YouTube and there's a couple of very good documentaries that document the whole process of when they found the body and stuff. And I would urge anyone that's interested in this just to go over and Google and go into YouTube, just Google Richard III's discovery or something like that, and there are several documentaries, and it is a fascinating story.
It certainly is. His bones have been taken from that grave, like I said. They've been reburied. Nice tomb at Leicester Cathedral. That's where his official tomb is now, at Leicester Cathedral. And they've got this projection. So if you go and visit the site of the grave, you can still see the grave itself and this projection of how his skeleton laid in that grave. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Now, let's have a quick look at the princes in the tower, because, again, this is... oh, goodness me. This is one in itself, isn't it? In 1674, 2 skeletons... I'm going to keep saying it, Paul, just to annoy you.
It doesn't annoy me, I just think it's amusing.
They were buried beneath a stone staircase and were found during alterations at the tower. The bones were then reburied in an urn in 1674 and then placed in the Henry VII chapel in the abbey. Oh, this aroused a lot of interest, as you can imagine.
Well, yeah.
Now, they assumed that these were the 2 princes that got murdered because of Richard, right? Now, Sir Thomas More states in his writings that the princes were buried at the stairfoot meetly deep, not very deep, basically.
Right.
He said that the princes were smothered with pillows in their beds by Sir James Tyrrell, John Dighton and Miles Forrest. Tyrrell is reported to have confessed the crime in 1502 when he was under the sentence of death for treason. God. Now, in 1933, the skeletons of these two boys, one was aged around 10 and the other around 13, so that fits the premise of what the age the boys were. They were disinterred from the Westminster Abbey and examined by L.E. Tannery and W. Wright. Don't know what the outcome was, apart from, it's two kids around 10 and 13. Now, when Richard III was discovered in the car park, they asked to have a look at these bones of the princes, they think are the princes, to basically see if they are. They wanted to carry out forensic examinations, basically. And they could carbon date as well.
Well, and they could do a DNA analysis as well, couldn't they?
They could do. It was refused.
Yeah.
It's not the first time it's been refused. It was refused in 1993. The BBC had put a request in, and so had Channel 4 in 1995. And in 2012, as I said, the Richard III Society asked to do it as well. Now, this isn't something that can just be done. You have to have a permission to do so.
Yeah.
Permission from the church and permission from the Queen. It's royal at the end of the day.
Yeah. Despite it being a Plantagenet, I mean, they are related. You know, the Queen is a direct descendant. Well, part descendant.
Exactly, but they've been refused. They won't let them do it. The reason they say this is because it doesn't matter whether carbon dating proves they're from the late 15th century. It only shown the time of death within around 50 years. And being as Richard III only occupied the throne for 2 years before being defeated by Henry VII, do you see what I mean? It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make anybody guilty.
When I read this piece in the research, I sort of done a bit of sort of nosing around, and Prince Charles is actually quite keen to actually have this done. But obviously his hands are tied until perhaps when he becomes king. I mean, there was a Guardian article about it. He is actually quite agreeable to it, but the current Queen isn't.
I think the only thing is it doesn't prove guilt of any particular person in history. I think that's the reason why. What's it going to prove now?
It doesn't have to prove guilt, though. I mean, at the end of the day, all it does is confirm history, and that's what we need. We need some confirmation of historic events.
All it would confirm, if it was the children, it was the children. It wouldn't be the motives behind who killed them or anything. It will just confirm that, basically.
But then if it really doesn't matter, what's the harm in doing it?
Yeah.
True.
Well.
But then again, you've got to look at it being... When we spoke to Richard, he said that the boys' bodies were thrown in a pauper's grave. Pottersfield.
Mm-hmm. At Pottersfield, round by the Tower of London, which,
Which would then, if it comes up that they're not related, that these two... These skeletons, although the age fits, are two completely unrelated children. God knows who they are or why they ended up at the bottom of the staircase in the Tower of London. If it's not them, who are they? And where are the bodies of the two princes? It reignites that argument, doesn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, but then equally, if it does turn out to be them, then who are the children? Who are the other children that they found?
That's what I just said, isn't it?
Oh, okay. Maybe the vice versa then.
Yeah. I don't know, but it would be interesting. Like you say, as a point of history, it would be interesting to find that out. But so far, that has been denied.
Yeah, well, it's not in our hands to sort of I mean, we as people are quite curious, and I can understand, we go, we want to know, but it's not our decision to make, and that's something we have to respect.
Yeah.
That's it, at least till Charlie comes along, and then we can ask him very quickly.
Yeah. We'll see. I think history will out on that one. I think time will out, I think is the word.
Definitely.
We shall see. Now, I want to make a quick reference. We've got to do it quickly because we're running out of time now. Elizabeth Woodville, the mother, the Queen Dowager, who obviously took sanctuary in Westminster Abbey, right? She was also known as the Witch Queen.
Well, she got a bit of a reputation, didn't she?
And she is portrayed in a lot of books, historical books and documentaries as somebody who basically used supernatural means to gain her position.
Oh, right.
Yes, because good old Edward came across it. It's a bit of a fairy tale as well. He was actually allegedly betrothed to this other lady, right? But Elizabeth waited for him under an oak. She knew the king was passing through, so she waited for him under an oak. And as soon as he saw her, they fell immediately in love. And they were married within weeks.
Ah.
There
you go.
She was quite lowly, really, in regards to, aristocracy. She wasn't poor, but she wasn't as well off as most people think. It caused absolute uproar. He married a commoner, basically. It was a massive upward leap.
There must have been a lot of other families must have had their noses put firmly out of joint by that.
Very much so. And she had a lot of siblings that then married wealthy partners because of her marriage to the king. And basically, from the minute they met, there were rumours of seduction and witchcraft to explain the king's behaviour. Anything to undermine Elizabeth.
Yeah, well, you can understand it, can't you? That probably would have been the first port of call for her detractors, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Now, dear, her greatest enemy was the king's mentor, the guy, kingmaker, right, who'd actually put him on the throne. Mm-hmm. He tolerated Elizabeth's influence, right? But he wasn't happy about this. He hated his rivals and he wanted to totally undermine her. He beheaded Elizabeth's father and brother and put her mother, Jaquetta, on trial for witchcraft. But Elizabeth held her nerve, right? So although this is going on, her family is being attacked and being accused of all sorts, including witchcraft. She held her nerve.
Well.
And give Edward his due. He held his as well. Because Warwick can force Edward to agree to anything, right?
Yeah.
So Edward remains married to Elizabeth. That's the only thing that saved her. Quite frankly. Her influence over Edward must have been astonishing.
Yeah, so I suppose, Richard Neville, as you say, is Warwick. I mean, the Earl of Warwick. So, quite an influential person at the time. Well, hence his name, the Kingmaker, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So to stand up to him.
But this tarnish, from this time of him trying to get rid of Elizabeth, this tarnish of witchcraft, of the family and all of that, basically damaged her reputation, and nothing was going to change that for Elizabeth. This is why she's now known as the Witch Queen.
And it's probably, later on in life, as you say, when, this has probably sort of strengthened her. And when her husband died, this is probably why she knew what would happen. So she sort of circumvented what would happen by putting her son immediately on the throne.
Most definitely. That's why she went into sanctuary pretty damn quick. But she never stopped. Even after Richard took the throne, her sons had been killed. Basically, that's it. Then her power's gone. She never, ever stopped conspiring. Even in her old age, she's got daughters on the throne. Her grandson was the Prince of Wales. This has ended up after all this murkiness of politics that had gone on. She was plotting against Henry Tudor. He confined her to Bermondsey Abbey. I can never say that word. But she was so influential. But she ended up being poor because she spent all of her fortune and her royal pensions on rebellions.
Yeah.
But she did found a dynasty. Very interesting character in her own right is Elizabeth Woodville. They say women didn't have power back in those days. I beg to differ.
Well, she certainly had something, didn't she?
Definitely.
When an age where men ruled, for better or worse, I mean, to actually go through that, a lifetime of it, more or less. Yeah, it's quite something.
Very much so. That was a whistle-stop tour through 3 of the kings that we spoke to on last week's show, to give you an idea of some of the macabre history and political manoeuvring that goes on around this time. And sometimes, if you can make sense of it, you're a better person than me, because it's very confusing at times.
You've done very well there, Kerry. Very well.
Well, we all did.
You confused me. This is going to be confusing.
Oh yeah, I know, right? Richard this and Richard that, and Richard was this person and another Richard and this Henry and that Edward. It gets very confusing. And hopefully we've made it a bit more sense of it for you all, a little bit more of a historical journey this week for you all. You think that's bad? Wait till we get to next week's show. We're going to take another person we spoke to was Jesus. And we're going to take a look. We're delving into a bit more of a religious, what's the word?
Oh, I don't know.
We're going to have a look at some of the tales and paranormal happenings that occur in the Bible, I think, where we're going next week.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So prepare yourselves for that one, guys.
It's going to be good.
On that note, we've actually come to the end of the show. Don't forget, go over to our website, paranormalconcept.com, to find the latest set of blogs, all the information and show links of previous shows for you all. Anything else you want to add, my beautiful men?
No,
that's about it, I think.
Yeah,
British history.
And don't forget, copy of our book is available on Amazon.
Definitely.
No, of course it is.
Definitely worth a read. Even I've got it.
Yeah, of course we have.
Yeah.
On that note, say good night, guys.
Good night, guys.
Good night, guys.